Welcome back to the Firekeepers. I'm Sarah Jamwall, co-founder of the Wired Ape, and today I'm so glad to be welcoming back one of our most memorable guests. Britt Keehn is a certified death doula and death coach, the founder of The Art of the End, and a survivor of 4 near-death experiences. In our first conversation, we explored her anthropological approach to dying and the idea that death, like everything else we do, can be approached as art. So today we're going to be going deeper. We're talking about ritual as medicine. What gets in the way when people try to use ritual to grieve and to heal? How Britt helps her clients break through those barriers, and what it actually takes to make ritual a consistent part of how we live with death rather than something we do once and walk away from. We're also going to be talking about something that has been in the cultural conversation lately. More and more people, including some surprising public figures, are turning to our death doula work, not just as a profession, but as a way of confronting their own mortality. And we want to know what Britt makes of that shift. So Britt, welcome back. It's so good to have you here again.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be back talking with you again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I think we'd like to know, death doula work is kind of an interesting field to go into. I know I myself hadn't really heard of it before. So how is it that you came to do this as work and how you saw this as kind of your calling?
Yeah, it really is something that has to call you deeply, I think. I was the beneficiary of 4 near-death experiences in a somewhat short period of my life, like within about 10 years, maybe even been shorter than that. And by the 4th one, which was I had complications from an autoimmune disease that was killing me. Because it was disease, I had time to really contemplate what was happening to me, to really be with it. And I had to be with it because I didn't have anyone with me at the time. I had no support. I had nobody. I just moved far away from family in a new city and was really, really struggling with the medical system. So I had really nothing to do but be present with this experience while I was trying to get through life. And I remember having a very conscious thought one night as I was falling asleep and just being so afraid of falling asleep because at that point I was so ill and depleted and exhausted. I was sleeping 12 to 16 hours a night and just waking up utterly exhausted anyway. I was unsure at any given time that I went to sleep that I would wake up the next day. It really was a terrifying thing to relent to the exhaustion each night. And I remember praying and being like, I'm getting so much information and I really feel like I could help people with this, but I can't help them if I'm dead. So if I could get an extension, I promise I'm going to use this. Like I really feel like I could use this. And I was extremely lucky that I was able to advocate and get medical intervention in time and was able to recover fully. But I remember maybe like a year after really like recovering and starting to get back on my feet again, coming across a death doula's Instagram account. And it was just this beam of light moment of like, that's the thing. It's the thing she's doing it. I'm going to do, that's the thing that I need to do. So it was very exciting. We just started a conversation and then eventually training programs came out and the rest is history.
Nice. So Nicole Kidman and Oscar-winning director Chloé Zhao recently completed, let me restart there. So actress Nicole Kidman has expressed some interest in becoming a death doula. Oscar-winning director Chloé Zhao recently completed level 1 death doula training. She said something that I think speaks for a lot of people, that she'd been terrified of death her whole life, so afraid that she hasn't been able to live fully or love with her heart open. When someone arrives at this work from that kind of a place, not from grief, but from fear, sounds like a kind of a different place than where you started the work. What does ritual specifically offer them that therapy or conversation alone cannot?
That's such a good question. I want to say a couple of things about this. Therapy is a detangler, I think. It really helps us comb through the knots. Conversations are a way of processing, of just kind of digesting material. And I think ritual allows us to be with concepts and transmute them in a way that feels spiritual. It feels like it's going into us on a deeper level. So, it's not that therapy and conversation can't also have those elements, but ritual is also much more deliberate. And I think that there's also, this is the other thing I want to say, that I find myself, I think it's really great for anybody to want to come into death work. I think that everybody who feels any sense of calling towards this work at all should follow that calling. It is not a great way to sustain yourself. And I cannot help but think when we have these celebrity mouthpieces who are feeling drawn towards this work that, and maybe this is the jaded side of me, that there's a little bit of PR work that goes into that. Death doula stuff has become a little bit trendy. When I first started this work years ago, nobody knew what it was. And now I'm getting more comments like, I've met someone who does this work before. Oh, I've heard of that. I may be the first one that they've met, but it's still something that is at least somewhere in their minds as a thing that exists. And so it's starting to feel like a trend that's catching on. And, again, I love anybody who does this work, but to actually do this work is to be in the trenches. It is difficult. It is frequently incredibly uncomfortable. We do all the planning that we can, but death itself is unpredictable and messy and heartbreaking. And I have a hard time picturing celebrities really taking on the true weight of this work.
Mm-hmm.
If they're doing the training is still amazing for mind and spirit to have these skills, to be able to understand how to be more present with our loved ones as they pass, and to be able to have these tools to give to others. But to be doing the actual work is a different kind of heavy lifting. And coming through it from a sense of fear, I think, is very powerful. But again, I see that as more self-serving, and that's not to say that in a negative way, because you really do have to reinforce yourself to do this work. But to be actively doing this work for others you have to be a servant.
Mm.
You cannot have self when you are doing this work. You are the giver of these services. So it's just interesting to watch these things come through.
I think, yeah, and that's definitely a different approach than what you mentioned, where you came at it from a place of love, right? And I think that probably really informs your approach to this work as well. So you work with people at some of the most resistant moments of their lives. What are the most common barriers you see? The things that stop people from engaging with rituals around death and grief, even when they know it might help them?
Unfortunately, in this economy, money is a big thing that comes up for people. Most people are unaware of how expensive it is to die in America. And they don't come to that realization until death is smacking them in the face. They've got a loved one dying or they're dying, and they've got to somehow scramble and figure all this out. And I had no idea how much a casket costs and how much a burial plot costs, and is cremation cheaper? And you're cutting every corner you can, trying to, we don't need a fancy urn, just put it in a cardboard box, it's fine, put it in a shoe box, it's okay. And then coming to me as ritual when they're financially frazzled, having never thought a moment about getting these things in order and having a ballpark of how much this is going to impact them, my work seems superfluous and extravagant. People, when they I've seen the stenciled in cafes on walls, just, good vibes only, smile, just no matter what. Those kinds of affirmations are nice, but they're very simplistic and end up being very exclusionary to people who are going through real shit. And the more we, trash compactor our feelings down and our realities down, the more when it comes time to actually be like, oh, I have no choice but to do something about this thing that is happening, people will still find ways to be avoidant. Okay, mom's dying. I have to put her body somewhere when she dies. So that's something I have to do. Okay. Do I have to get a death doula? And they'll call me and they'll talk and they'll process in our introductory sessions. Sometimes we'll go through a handful of sessions where they're just really processing out loud. And I'm kind of a catching vessel for their grief process and just how hard this is for them to come to terms with. And then when I'm like, all right, cool, we've got all this information, I think it's time for us to start outlining a plan and stepping forward, that's when they're out. because it's just one more thing. And if it can be avoided, people who live in that avoidance mindset generally choose to avoid it.
How do you yeah, I mean, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So you've talked before about the role of the physical environment in death work, that a prepared environment matters as much as a hospital room as it does anywhere else. So when someone wants to introduce ritual into a space that was not designed for it, like a hospital or a care facility, a family home that's resistant, what kind of practical steps do you take to create that container anyway?
That one is actually surprisingly easy. You just start small with little things like maybe a framed photo for the bedside table or somewhere else in the room, bringing a favorite blanket or other comfort item, and you just build from there. And care facilities are going to have a lot more flexibility for you to really personalize a space. Hospitals, it's harder, especially if your person is being moved around, but generally once they're in their final stages, you have stability. Be like, this is where they are. We're going to come to them. They may not be able to get their own private suite, depending upon who you are, what kind of income you're working with, what kind of hospital you're working with. But there's still a lot that you can do to personalize the space with draperies, twinkle lights, get a salt lamp to try to soften and create an ambiance in the room, just bringing in whatever portable pieces that make this space, however small you have to work with, feel a bit more like this person. And I like to really pay attention to what effect I see these items having on this person, because sometimes people get really excited with this part of just like, oh, I didn't know I could bring all these things in. And before they know it, they brought all the things in, and their person is feeling agitated and very overwhelmed by all the things. And so we have to, if we have the ability to still be verbally communicating with that person, ask questions about like, yeah, this is too much. What if we took this thing out? You seem a little irritated by the twinkle lights. Is that a bit much for you right now? Maybe we should have them not on strobe mode. Maybe an ambient glow would be okay. Maybe none. Maybe none. Maybe that would be better in just working. It's a lot easier to take away than it is to add. So I tend to encourage people to go a little bit mad in the beginning once they get that like excited, like, oh, this can be a way that I can feel in control of some part of this, which is so welcome.
So grief isn't really linear, of course, and neither is ritual engagement. Sure, some clients probably come to you on fire with intention and then kind of fall away. So what does it look like when someone cannot maintain the consistency with the rituals you have introduced? And what do you do to help them come back without any kind of shame?
Before I became a death doula, I was a child behaviorist. And so I am really good at seeing the mechanisms behind behavior and observing and asking lots of questions to try to understand what is the root of why we're having difficulty with X, Y, or Z that is taking place, and really talking them through that, because in places of extremity, so like grief, we tend to be a bit more primal in our responses, a bit more stripped down and away from our pretenses, and a bit more reactive, which makes my job as an observer a lot easier because I can really see the behaviors of just like, oh, you're reactionary about this. Okay, let's have a conversation about that. Let me ask some questions so we can get down to that. And instead of me taking over in a kind of like overpowering kind of way, a dictatorial kind of way, just from a very small problem-solving way that feels very personal to that person, to be like, hey, I know all this is going on with your loved one, but I see you struggling with this. Can you tell me about that? And unfortunately, it is the case that a lot of people are going to be overwhelmed or have other reasons why they feel like they cannot continue with the ritual or with having me do the work at all. And I always leave that door open. I always want to meet people where they are. It's not up to me to try to get them anywhere. Everybody's grief journey is a holy path that they are walking alone. I'm there to be a guide if they want me. If they don't, that's okay. That's part of their grief journey. The door will always be open. I want nothing less than to be perceived as an ambulance chaser with this. Just this work is sacred to me, and hoping that they will come back. I usually do a few check-ins, but after that, it's just, hey, I'm here. I'm here if you need me. And sometimes they trickle back at the very last when the finish line is in sight. And sometimes I never hear from them again, and that's okay too.
I think about my mother passed away when I was pretty young, very unexpectedly. And I think about how we really stumbled through making all of those decisions. So I think it's the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And I wonder too if people had able to work with you in the way that you are offering, how much easier their Greek journey would be, as you say.
Yeah, I think it's just nice to have somebody there. We're such social creatures. We are born into nurturing. We're born into community. I've personally been a therapy graduate for many, many years, but I continue going to therapy because to me, I always tell people it's like when you're swimming in a swimming pool and you've been at it all day. And you're a strong swimmer, but like sometimes you just want to touch the wall. You just want to rest your hand on it. You're still down to swim, but it's just nice to touch the wall because you get tired. And that's my job. If you want me to, be your mountaineer and help you climb this whole grief mountain, I'll get you to the top. It's going to be a beautiful view. But sometimes, and I think most of the time, people just need to reach out and know that somebody is there. I can't tell you how many times when I'm with a client, my phone will ring, I'll get a text. They'll just want to, hey, can you come over and can I talk to you real quick? Like everything's fine. I just need to talk to you. And they are such quick little calls of just being like, hey, I need to say I hate this. I need to say I'm frustrated. Or I need to go off on the doctor or the hospice nurse or my brother or my sister or my grandfather who's being a jerk right now, like whatever it is, to just know that there's someone there to receive that, who's going to help alleviate that burden as best they can, but mostly just to see them. Be like, yeah, I see this. This is happening and you are having a really hard time and that makes all the sense and that's okay. And then they just, like any of us when we're hurt, just be like, thank you for validating me. That's nice. we can carry on.
So when you look at, in our first interview, you mentioned some cultures and their kind of death rituals. So when you look at these kinds of cultures that have survived, the rituals that have survived for thousands of years, ones that are still practiced and still passed down, what do they have in common structurally? What do you think makes a ritual stick across the generations?
Contact and care are the two biggest ones. We can have big elaborate rituals. We can have much more small intimate rituals. We can burn a body, bury a body, wrap a body. But what I see as the unifying factors are care and presence. So washing the body is universal. As far as I know, every single culture bathes the body in some way or another, even if you're leaving that up to the hospital to do that. But most cultures involve the family or some appointed person in the community to bathe the body, to dress the body, to wrap the body, to get the body ready for whatever the next step will be, whether we're burying, cremating, doing aquamation, composting, whatever. And being very, very present with that. And for cultures like modern American cultures where we tend to let hospitals take care of that, there's still time where usually there's a family member who will come or several family members who will come and place jewelry like rings on fingers, their favorite necklace, make sure they're in their favorite suit or dress or whatever, comb their hair, a sense of personhood. We recognize that this body and the person that we knew and loved are now separate entities and have been separated, but we still are acknowledging and respecting this body as being the way that we recognized them and loved them and caring for that. And I think that that's so gorgeous that we tend to do that just across the board as humans. We need that.
You serve communities that mainstream death care is often overlooked. LGBTQIA plus individuals, neurodivergent people, families navigating pediatric loss. Are there any specific ritual barriers that come up for these communities that do not come up for others? And how do you adapt your approach in those cases?
Yeah, there are some specifics with neurodivergent family members. It's just a matter of being a bit more sensitive to what those sensory needs are going to be. Can the family members handle large groups of people, or do we need to have mourners come in small groups and just do them in waves? Do we need to have soft lighting or bright lighting? Do we want windows open, windows closed? Do we want music playing? Is that going to be too much? And just really fine tuning that based on how the neurodivergence manifests for the individuals involved. As a neurodivergent person, I find that work very easy for me because it's incredibly intuitive to be like, no, I get it. We'll figure it out. I get it. Yeah, no, that annoys me too. Well, let's just get rid of that. We don't have to have that. We'll find something else. With LGBTQIA uh, deaths, it becomes potentially, blessedly not always, but potentially tricky depending upon if we have issues of family members who did not accept a loved one who is dying, who is part of that community. And that can be a little tricky depending upon which one of the people is hiring me. If parents are hiring me, and thank goodness I haven't had this experience yet, if the parents are hiring me and, they don't approve of their gay son, trans daughter, whatever it is, that would be very difficult work. I don't know if I'd be able to take those clients personally because that goes against my personal viewpoints. That would be some very tricky conversations to try to have with them in the beginning to see if there is going to be some flexibility, if I can reach them on that at all. If the person who is a member of the LGBTQIA community is the person hiring me, then, I'm going to be more free to follow my heart and be able to give them the autonomy and respect and individuality that they want, to be acknowledged for the person that they are and the life that they've led, and to have that be authentically celebrated as possible, with me being whatever intermediary I possibly can be to that effect. Where it gets a little bit more dicey is with legality, which unfortunately we are in this country really struggling with allowing trans people to be acknowledged as full human beings that have the same rights as everybody else, which I vehemently disagree with. So sometimes you might have a trans person who's dying, they have a spouse, they have a whole life, family, community, people who absolutely adore them, seeing them for who they truly are. And there might be some family members who are now trying to get the rights to put their dead name on the gravestone. So that has to be something, I can walk through the loved ones, the loved parties, on what their state's rights are, what kind of rights they have, what kind of autonomy they can exert, and just bolster them as best I can emotionally, which usually involves me suggesting that they get a lawyer. But that's where it becomes a little bit trickier, is when we have legislation that dehumanizes individuals who are now in this extremely vulnerable position of not having the ability to fight for themselves anymore. So I do the best I can with that, but it can be very stressful, unfortunately. Thankfully, I've been very lucky that all the clients that I've have had extremely loving, extremely accepting families.
What is the hardest barrier you've had ever helped someone break through? You don't need to share any identifying details, of course, but is there a moment that stays with you where you watch someone move from resistance to ritual and something shifted for them?
What do I choose? So there was this friend, I got the gift to be a dear friend's death doula. This person had been just like the grandfather of this community that I became adopted into and loved so very, very much. And he got cancer and was dying and was just absolutely adored by his community. And in the initial stages of his planning, when he was still very much a well person, but with a terminal diagnosis, the plan was, we're going to party all the way through. This is just going to be a beautiful, ongoing, revolving door of loving faces, good food, great music, dancing. And it was like that for a while. But as he deteriorated, it became harder for him to enjoy this, and also harder for him to self-advocate. And so that was was a hard thing for me to maneuver because this was also my community, and helping people understand, like, no, this is a thing that happens with death work, is that we set a plan, but that plan is only contingent upon the circumstances that the plan was set in. We have to be flexible. And now the circumstances have changed, so we have to pivot. And there came a moment in the very end, where in the last week or so of his life, and he deteriorated so much. He wasn't officially in a coma, but he was fully unconscious without any revival, any waking for the last 2 weeks of his life. And he was on fluids for a while, but then in the last week they pulled him off, and he still wasn't dying. His brother was there. His brother's a nurse. And he kept checking with me. We'd do his vitals every morning, and he'd go through all the things, check this, check that, to get all the numbers. And he'd look at me and be like, okay, so what are we looking at? Like, it's going to happen today, right? And I'd be like,
right. Yeah.
I'd just look at him and be like, this person is still fully in his body. He's not going anywhere anytime immediately soon. And it got to a point where these family members, these community members, and I knew what was happening, but it's one of those things of just like, everybody wants to love him so badly, and they just want to keep him, but they're also like, this doesn't seem right. And they had that breakthrough moment of like, okay, don't want this to come across in any sort of negative way, but why won't he die? And I was like, okay, this person loves all of you so very much. He's still very much in his body, and he still loves all of you so very much. And what did he hate more than anything? Letting any of you down. Now you've got this party that will not quit. It won't even pause. And he's got to do something that takes body and soul focus and decide to leave. And you're not letting him. And the way that information hung in the air as everybody truly contemplated and digested it was so powerful. And they're like, okay, well, what should we do? And I'm like, we gotta bring it down like 8 notches. Like, we've had this dance music going. We gotta bring it down. This has got to feel less like a dance studio, more like a yoga studio. It's got to be the most mellow ever. And we've got to have about 75% less human beings in here at any given time. Select your core group of people. And one of the friends was a DJ, and he just like immediately understood the assignment, shifted the musical vibe right then and there. And I could feel the tonal shift in my own body. And I was like, this is vibrationally where we need to be. And everybody else, we've got all these incredibly musical people because they're all dancers, just kind of, once they could feel the music shift, they understood, okay, and they talked amongst themselves, decided who was going to be the core group, and he ended up passing within 24 hours. Yeah, death we think of it as this thing that we get kidnapped out of our bodies and taken to the other world. It's rarely, honestly, like that. There's, especially with age and disease, there's a lot of who that individual is and how they interact with their community, with their world, that goes into the intricacy of how and when they depart.
So now that you have done this work for years across, I'm sure, many people, in some of the most intense moments a human being can face, has the work itself become more of a ritual for you? And has proximity to so much death and grief changed your own relationship to being alive?
Yes, to all of the above. When I take a client, we'll do just an introductory kind of intake where I get the basics of what's going on, who's involved, what's happening, what are we looking at here, what do we think our needs are. But the moment that I really flick on for this is the moment that I step through the threshold of the home or nursing home or whatever it is, wherever this person is. And I truly feel like the second my foot crosses that threshold, that I go from being Britt to being Britt the death doula. I transform into this other very fluid being that operates with a great sense of flow, a great sense of intuition, and views the world differently. So it's incredibly ritualistic for me in that way of just being able to pop fully into that role. And this work changes some things. I feel like I was already changed just from my near-death experiences to be a lot more present and a lot more grateful to try to keep the perspective of things and keep death in mind, because I had the very real lesson of like, hey, no matter how healthy you are, because I was at my athletic peak right before I got sick, that this can happen to you, and to be as spiritually ready as you possibly can, getting your affairs in order, making sure that, your dog gets farmed out to the right people to take care of them, and your money goes here and your loans are paid off there and blah, blah, blah. Like that helps you to relax and be like, okay, no big worries. I can die in peace now. But the real work is the spiritual work. And that's what we can do every single day of our lives, of just being like, this will end. And I need to be okay with that. And what's it going to take for me to be okay with that? How do I need to start living today and treating the people around me today to start being okay with that? It is constant work, but working with others with death has definitely taught me, it has deepened my compassion and empathy so much to understand the intricacies of what sometimes looks very ugly on the surface, because grief sometimes brings out the ugliest parts of us because we're so hurting. We're in so much pain. Really, like grief, the part of our brain that recognizes emotional duress is the same part of our brain that recognizes physical duress. Whether I get punched in the face or something happens to someone I love, my brain thinks it's the same thing and sometimes will react the same way with anger or vitriol or defiance. And so really being able to witness people in those incredibly difficult, incredibly painful experiences and understand this is not the whole of that human being. I know they might be their most awful in their entire lives right now, but I also know that they're watching their mom die. I also know that they had a very complicated relationship with their brother, and that this is a lot for them and a lot's coming up for them. So that has been a big thing that I carry with me into the rest of the world. Just being, you see someone on the street and you're just like, man, what is that guy's problem? And I realize I don't know, but I know that he's having a problem because otherwise he wouldn't act that way.
So it sounds like it's brought a lot of compassion, and it sounds like you were a naturally compassionate person before these experiences, but it's really amplified that for you. If someone listening right now has never had any ritual around death or grief, no ceremony, no practice or anything, and they wanted to start, what do you think is the most important thing to get right? And what is the one thing they shouldn't worry about getting wrong?
What they shouldn't worry about getting wrong is what they need to get right.
Mm,
I think being present is the best thing that you can do. Be present, be empathetic, be aware as much as possible. And the ritual is something that you're already doing. A lot of people love the idea of ritual, but then they get really hung up on it having to look a certain way. Do I need to have 3 monks come in and chant? Do I need to have very calm music kind of playing? Should I light incense? I never purchased incense before. Where do you even buy incense? I don't know. With the oils? What do people do? And I get very hung up on these ideas. And it's like, buddy, you make your coffee every morning. You make it the same way. That's a ritual. You have your 12-step skincare routine every night. That's a ritual. You call
mm.
your mom every Saturday. That's a ritual. Like everything we do, you go to the gym, you go on your morning run, everything is a ritual. And there's a holiness to everything that we ritualize already. So sometimes it can be simple of just grandpa liked to smoke cigars. If grandpa's not hooked up to oxygen, maybe he can have one more cigar. And if not, he can have the cigar and we'll just not light it. You can smell it. That's fine.
Right, right.
Just retooling it to something as simple as this was your favorite show. This is your favorite show of all time. I know we've all watched it a million times together over this long lifetime that you've had. Let's watch it again as a family. Rituals already imbued in our lives and we just don't even think about it. So it's actually really easy.
So I want to, people want to get in touch with you. How could they do that?
I can be reached via my website, theartoftheend.com. I am available on social media at The Art of the End. And through my website, you'll be able to find my email address, my phone number. I accept carrier pigeons and ravens. You'll find me.
Of course, we'll put this information in the show notes too, so
Great.
people will be able to access you as well.
Please send me ravens. That would be dope.
That's a lifelong dream, right?
A girl's got a dream.
But thank you so much again for joining us. What I think about after this conversation with you is that the barriers that you've described, the shame, the fear, the family resistance, not knowing how to start, these aren't failures of the individual. They're symptoms of a culture that's stopped teaching us how to be with death. And the fact that you keep showing up session after session, help people break through those barriers one ritual at a time. It's not just clinical work, of course. That's a form of healing that our whole culture needs.
Agreed.
It shows that, there's this hunger that cuts across every kind of life. And practitioners like you are the ones building that table. So if this conversation moved you, please share it with someone who's grieving, someone who's afraid, or someone who's been white knuckling through loss without any kind of ritual to hold them. So you can find us at thewiredape.com on podcast platforms and on social media. So I'm Sarah Jamwall. This is the Firekeepers, understanding the primal and building the spiritual.